Right, I'll just get set up real quick. What a day. It was, the website bills this as, I think say, 3 topics and 1 curated track. And while I can see that's very clearly true, very, very diverse talks throughout the day. Been really, really impressive to watch everyone bring so much different stuff to the stage. I think my talk is most likely going to be seen as the philosophical counterpart to Ryan's talk. Bit of a rant. Any JavaScript developers in the room? I'll apologize now. No, so, right, I'm all set up. I'm good, I think, to go. Perfect. So yeah, thanks for your time. Last talk of the day. I'm very, very grateful to be here. Build for the web, build on the web, build with the web. I usually give quite technical, quite dry talks. I've always joked that I'm not a particularly inspiring person, but I can be quite useful. So my talks normally look at deep dives into specs, caching, browser behaviors, new APIs. But this talk is a little different. I don't normally sort of put myself on the line with opinions and philosophies. But this talk's going to be a look at how I think we should build for and on and with the web. It's going to be part love letter to the platform. I think the web is a very, very empowering place indeed, and I echo a lot of Ryan's sentiments. He closed his talk with, the web as a platform, that kind of democratization, well, there's capitalistic side, right? How quickly you can get to market on the web is unparalleled anywhere else. But also, it's for everyone. It's for people like me when I was a teenager just messing around with HTML and CSS in my bedroom to multi-billion-dollar organizations, for better or worse. So it's going to be part love letter, but it's also going to be part cautionary tale. I'm going to look at some car crashes, some case studies, some real-life examples from my own work where things have gone wrong, where clients have perhaps strayed a bit too far from the web as a platform and found themselves in sort of thorny and potentially expensive places. I've had to come in and help them get back on track. We'll look at some very, very real case studies from that. The other working title for this talk was, if you love JavaScript so much, why have you written so much of it? But I decided to go with the other title. I'm Harry. I've traveled across from Leeds, so not far. I've been a developer in the north of England for a very, very long time now. You can find me as CSS Wizardry everywhere. Don't ask. But my job is to help clients like these find and fix site speed issues. Very fortunate I've worked with some very fascinating, some very interesting, and very lovely clients in my time. I've been working for myself for 12 years now, but I've been working as a professional on the web since 2008. So I've been doing this for a very, very long time. And in that time, I've seen the web change a lot. But most importantly, and certainly most importantly for this talk, in that time, I've seen the web stay the same. And that's a beautiful thing. It makes a very safe bet, and that's going to be one of the core tenets of this talk that underpins a lot of my thinking. In my time working on the web, I've seen a lot of change, and I've seen a lot of things stay the same. So this talk actually started as a rant on LinkedIn over a year ago now, but I just had it was a bit of a heartbreaking moment, really. I was lamenting the fact that I had 2 completely different clients, completely different industries, completely different markets, but they both had one thing in common. Well, they had 2 things in common. One was that they were both collectively, between them, losing months and months and months of developer productivity to simple, or what should have been simple, framework upgrades. They were tied into an ecosystem that strayed a bit too far from the platform, and it kind of went against the grain of the web. I saw teams sinking hundreds of thousands of collective developer hours, sorry, not hundreds of thousands of hours, pounds of just time and money into re-platforming what should have been a really simple, trivial upgrade. The other thing they had in common is they both hired me twice to fix these problems. Both clients hired me initially to sort out site speed problems with their new, effectively both e-com sites. They both went on the same upgrade journey. Again, completely different companies. They don't even know each other exist. The second thing they have in common is they hired me twice. They upgraded from, it was Nuxt, from I think it was 2 to 3 or whatever it was, or 3 to 4, and site speed tanked again. And they had to hire me a second time, which good for business for me, I guess, but it's not the kind of money I want to be earning. You should never have to call pest control twice. One thing I should actually mention is I'm a web performance engineer. Everything I care about is about making websites fast. So this entire talk should be seen through the lens of someone who cares more than anything about making websites fast. It's going to be slightly biased or very biased towards that. A little disclaimer before we get too far in. This talk isn't anti-React. I haven't even mentioned the name React yet, but if it does slip into the talk, if I do say React at any point, I'm using it as a fairly lazy placeholder for either heavy JavaScript frameworks, things with concepts like hydration or single-page apps, soft navigations, all that kind of stuff. It's a lazy catch-all for all of this kind of stuff. But this talk isn't anti-React. And in fact, if anything, I love React. It's been a big part of my business model for the last 10 years. So it's an anti-React, and I do understand why React exists. React was developed behind closed doors between 2011 and 2013 by Facebook. And imagine, Facebook was dealing at unprecedented scale at the time. The things that they were working on were very specific and very unique and very new. And something like a stateful UI, which you can subscribe to, and something like React made a lot of sense for that context. But then it got very broad adoption across the entire industry, and sites that should not have been using anything like it just scooped it up, hoovered it up, gobbled it up. And I really think that was the problem, because when we talk about React and Facebook problems, there's only one company in the world solving Facebook problems. That's Facebook, isn't it? It's not us. So this talk is going to be looking at better defaults, better choices for technology. For my sins, many, many moons ago, I was part of the original team that built the first version of skybet.com. This was a long time ago. Coincidentally, I worked on this project from roughly 2011 to 2013. So when Facebook were working on React behind closed doors, me and a team of engineers over in Leeds were building this. React wasn't available to us then, but I can guarantee you, had it been, we would have used it. For things like this, for these use cases, I understand why single-page apps exist. I understand why libraries like React exist. I'm not naive to the importance and the usefulness. This talk is more about using them in the right context. Still paying off a lot of moral debt for this one, by the way. I was only there for 2 years. But so the number of companies solving Facebook problems is exactly one. The next concept I want to look at is this idea of innovation, adoption, and calibration. So I think a lot of developers, I can't prove it, but I do think a lot of developers don't actually realize that most of the platform and ecosystem innovation doesn't come from the browsers or the spec authors. It comes from developers. It comes from people like Facebook who develop things like React. And the platform, whether that's spec writers or browsers, they see good design patterns. They see good ideas in these tools, and they subsume them. The amount of things that jQuery has given the platform is testament to this. So innovation is important, and it's important that we're building things like React. Adoption, then, so that adoption, the platform subsumes those things. If they are a good enough idea, they'll become first-class citizens. By becoming a first-class citizen, they're normally going to be faster, more accessible, more secure, and most importantly, maintained by someone completely else, right? The browser will take on that job of maintaining these features. But then I think we need to step into an area of calibration, or perhaps this should say recalibration. And this is the kind of point where I think the industry is getting to as a whole, where we start to see cracks in the wall. We start to see things going wrong, and we start to actually recalibrate and bring things back in a bit. Because with a lot of the tools that we lean on, we accept, or we sort of take on a lot of unsuitable defaults. I see the web as being a bit more like a buffet than it is like a set menu. You can pick and choose the bits you need. A lot of clients say to me, or developers, peers say, well, you get a lot off the shelf. You get a lot out of the box with if I use a framework, I get a lot of stuff for free. I get a lot of stuff out of the box. And the problem is, a lot of the stuff that comes out of the box, you might not actually need, and it may end up actually becoming a millstone around your neck at some other point down the line. I actually took this. In fact, Ryan, do you remember when I was out for a bike ride and you whizzed past me down that hill? This was taken at the bottom of that hill. I actually took this photo. This is in Leeds. I actually took this photo. All I can imagine is someone's having their node modules delivered. But these unsuitable defaults lead me into a situation that I see on, I would honestly posit, over 90% of my client work. Most of my clients have built SPAs that simply shouldn't have been SPAs. A lot of my work, a lot of the way I kind of talk to clients is cheap rhetoric, basically. And I'm about to give you one of my cheapest shots, one of my cheapest tricks. Nearly every single project I've worked on has been an SPA, and it shouldn't have been. There have been a few notable examples, dashboards or real-time collaboration type things. There are exceptions, and there are things that should be SPAs. For the most part, most websites should not be built as an SPA or with a front-end framework that gives you that functionality. Now, the cheap shot is this. Rather than sitting down with a client and telling them, you shouldn't have built this as an SPA, it's negative, and it doesn't really foster a good start to a project, I will say to them, hey, look, I'm starting the project on Monday. I'm here to make your website faster. What are the key pages I should look at? They'll say, well, homepage maybe, product page for definite, search pages are important to us, campaign landing pages, they're actually really important. And I'll say to them, right, you've just listed 4 pages in under 10 seconds. Why on earth did you build a single page app? You've just named 4. This is not a single page app. You've just proved it. And that normally sort of gets the cogs working and okay, maybe. And it is a cheap shot because you can't just remove an SPA. Ryan alluded to this in his talk. You can't just move away from it like that. But it does sort of get the ball rolling. People start to think more about their decisions. A lot of people pick SPAs because they end up optimizing to a scenario that may not exist. This is a true story. This next slide is I've loosely tried to anonymize it. If you can work out who this client is, please don't tell your friends. Play the game. I've loosely anonymized them. This is a publisher. This is a newspaper or a news kind of site that got in touch with me a few years ago, and they, it's such a cheap, I mirrored it, I flipped it, like that's going to make it harder to work out who it is. But this is a company that got in touch with me, and they're a news publisher, like a newspaper, basically. And they were like, Harry, we've refactored away from our existing technology stack onto something else with Next.js in front of it. Now, it was so long ago, I cannot remember what they'd refactored from and to, but I know for a fact the new version had Next.js in front of it, and it was slower. They sort of scoped out this fancy new stack, and they said, well, we'll put Next.js in front of it. That's what everyone's doing. Next.js must be sensible. It's what everyone's using. We should use it. And it was just a lot slower. And I asked them, hey, so I'm just interested to know, why Next.js? Why have you gone for that route? Why a single-page app? They said, well, Harry, we understand that we have to download lots of JavaScript to start with, but the second page view is a lot faster, isn't it? Because you just fetch the data. I logged into their Google Analytics, and I promise you this is true. Their bounce rate was 89%. What second page view? There isn't one. Their problem isn't their tech stack. It's the fact that 11% of people may have gone on to view a second article. They built an entire tech stack, their entire front end, around a scenario that may benefit 11% of their readership. Just completely, it's putting the cart before the horse. It just made no sense to me. And they had to spend more money getting me in to fix it. I see this a lot in projects as well, the idea of robbing Peter to pay Paul, or if you like, the whack-a-mole. Like you fix one problem and it just pops up somewhere else. Just by show of hands, has anybody tried to optimize Core Web Vitals on a single-page app before? Right, it's unreasonably difficult, isn't it? It's way harder than it should be. And I flip-flop my opinion on this quite a lot, because when Chrome developed Core Web Vitals, they didn't design it to be compatible with single-page apps. Single-page apps and Core Web Vitals, to this day, are incompatible. Now, part of me thinks, well, if, as developers, we're going to turn our back on the platform and use non-standard features, then Chrome and the Crux team, they don't owe it to us, or the Core Web Vitals team, rather, they don't owe it to us to make Core Web Vitals work with SPAs. If we've decided to turn our back on the platform, they don't owe it to us. Then I also think it's quite naive of Chrome, when they were developing Core Web Vitals, to look at the web ecosystem, to look at how many single-page apps are out there, and still build a suite of performance metrics that are incompatible. They just don't work together. A really good example of this, the idea of moving problems from one place to the other, is a client of mine. I worked with them. They're an e-commerce firm. I had a really spirited conversation with one of their engineers. Now, this company, the project was fascinating. This firm sells digital products. So it's a fully international firm. It's a borderless business. All they really have to worry about is their tax commitments in whatever country they're selling in. But there's no shipping, there's no supply chain. They operate fully globally. And they hired me because their INP scores, their interactivity scores, were really, really bad. Their paint scores were really, really good. And what I found interesting was they'd built their e-commerce site with Next.js, which I thought was a terrible idea. And the reason that INP scores were so bad is that they'd managed to, they were deferring their modules, they were server-side rendering, they could hit paint timing globally, they could hit LCP everywhere. They were green all over the world because they could load the page fast enough to pass the 2.5-second LCP threshold. But because they built it as a single-page app, the sheer amount of JavaScript that was required during hydration and for the app to boot, this page has nothing interactive. It's got a hamburger menu when you put it onto a mobile device. This does not need a runtime. It doesn't need a framework. But the amount of JavaScript involved was choking the CPUs of customers in South Asia. We're talking properly cheap $20 Android devices. And the takeaway here, and it kind of, again, alludes to something Ryan said, is that it seems that network capability or network connection capability across the world improves at a faster rate than the low-end CPU of device class, or the low-end class of devices. Basically, even in the worst network conditions on the planet, well, not the worst, but less favorable ones, they could still pass milestone timings like LTP. But the amount of JavaScript required to sort of run the app was choking low-end devices. They'd solved LTP, they'd created a whole new class of problem elsewhere. And that's what I was brought in to fix. What's interesting is I had a very spirited, almost an argument, but it was healthy. We had a conversation at the pub. One of the engineers, he was one of the senior developers on this project, and I sort of said, why a single-page app for an e-commerce? It's digital products, but this is just an e-com store. It's not complex. It's not a new problem to solve. Why a single-page app? He said, well, every page has got the same header and footer. I was like, well, that doesn't make it the same page, though, does it? They've got the same header and footer, but nothing about that statement, albeit true, suggests that they're all the same page. It just makes no sense. And I said to him, the irony is, you've traded maybe 5 compressed kilobytes of HTML per page view for 720 kilobytes of JavaScript. Just to avoid retransmitting a header and footer, you've said, I don't want to send a header and footer on every page view, so I'll send the full front-end runtime instead. It just makes no sense. We fixed the problem, but again, they had to spend money on me to fix a problem they created for themselves. And an annoying thing, a thing I hear from developers all the time is, but it's faster that way. We take a big hit up front, we download a big bundle or a few big bundles up front, but then it's faster, isn't it, afterwards? The second page is faster. If it's faster, then why am I in your office? If it's faster, why are we running a web performance project? It can't be faster, and the numbers corroborate it. This is very crude data, but very coarse, I guess, not crude, but if we look at the web in general, about 53% of domains pass all 3 core web vitals. If we look at WordPress, that number is 47%, so it's pretty good. About half of all WordPress installs on the web pass all 3 core web vitals. If we look at the next two of the 2 biggest sort of JavaScript frameworks, Next and Nuxt, we've got 31 and 27% respectively. We lose about 20 percentage points, anywhere between 20 and 30, around 20 to 30 percentage points. I would posit WordPress is faster by accident than Next.js is on purpose. And I genuinely think that to be true. The amount of effort you have to go to make a Next.js project fast is way disproportional to how much you have to do to make a WordPress install fast. Boring is often the better bet. Said to clients all the time, all else being equal, doing more work will never be faster. A different publisher, they'd gone from a big sort of multi-site WordPress install for their newspapers. And it was fast, and they passed all their core vitals, and it was great. And they said to me, Harry, we're refactoring, we're going headless WordPress, and we're putting Next.js in front of it. And what this tells me is something fascinating. What this tells me is that WordPress was obviously good enough, because you're keeping it in there. It's just not cool enough. And people just want to use something a bit cooler, and that's why they went for Next.js, and ultimately, surprise, I got an email to go and fix it after it had gotten slower. Does anybody remember this website going viral about 2 years ago? Big, just hands right in the air if you saw this going viral. That's great. That's about 15 of us maybe. Great. Someone found this website. McMaster Carr is like a big sort of hardware store, like retailer in the US. And they're quite a household. They were the kind of company that sent out massive catalogs back in the day. But a developer found this site, and like, oh my goodness, it's so fast. And they looked under the hood, and it's like, oh my god, it's just HTML, and they're not using a framework. And people lost their shit. People were doing reaction videos. People were doing reaction videos to the reaction videos. People were going crazy over this. And everyone was asking the same question, how have they done it? How have they made this website so fast? And my answer was actually, they didn't.
Nobody made this website fast. They just didn't make it slow. The platform gives you so much for free. For all its foibles and idiosyncrasies, the web gives you so much for free. So it's the boring answer, but nobody made this website fast. It's just nobody made it slow. One interesting thing is all of these reaction videos, all of this sort of furore, all of this excitement, everyone was looking at the desktop site. McMaster-Card do some user agent sniffing, and on mobile, you get a div ID equals root. It's a fully client-rendered JavaScript application. But it's new, it's modern, it's better. The desktop site had finished rendering before the mobile one had even started. You cannot tell me that's a better experience. And again, this topic's going to keep coming up in the talk. They spent money getting to this position. They spent money on getting here. This is just a side-by-side comparison using a tool called Web Page Test. If we look at the real user data, how actual customers, actual real people experience this site, the numbers, again, corroborate the story. Taller is worse. Mobile is markedly slower than desktop. So when people asked, how did they make it so fast? It's like, well, they didn't. They just didn't do what they did for the mobile site. They made the mobile site slow. So this brings us back to the idea that traditional MPA-type architectures, simple rendering models, HTML first, these are your sensible defaults. A framework is very rarely going to be a sensible default. It may make sense in some scenarios, but it's very rarely going to be a good starting point. My friend Nolan Lawson said it best when he said, the best SPA is better than the best MPA, but the average SPA is worse than the average MPA. It's a bit of a confusing sentence, or two sentences, but I think it is very succinct. I think this sums it up beautifully. You have to put a lot of effort into making an SPA fast that you just simply don't even have to consider if you use an MPA. And don't even get me started on the phrase MPA. We'll come back to that later in the talk. Whew. But yeah, it comes back to this. I've mentioned this a few times. It costs a lot to look this cheap in every scenario I've talked about on this stage, and countless others as well. My clients have all spent a lot of money getting themselves into those situations. It's a bit heartbreaking. It costs a lot to look this cheap. They've spent money building platforms, solutions, tech stacks that ultimately own them, and they just have to keep throwing money after it. I think memes are quite a cheap tool to use in talks, but I can't help but think of something like this. You know Imager, Imager.com, the image hosting website? Years ago, I was on Reddit, whatever. I ended up getting sent off to Imager. I just noticed, my goodness, that was slow. So I ran a web page test. Imager, the only job it has for us as consumers is to show me an image. Fully client-rendered React application, the image was the 227th request. It's like someone had forgotten why they'd gone to work. It's like, oh my God, the image. We forgot the image. This is a snippet from the LinkedIn post. These were ex-clients who had to rehire me because their supposed upgrades came with severe site speed regressions. This is heartbreaking. I do a lot of cycling, and I've got my mechanic, a guy called Craig, really lovely guy. He explains it in terms of bikes. With expensive bikes don't break less often. They cost more. They just cost more to fix when they do break. And it's the same with your tech stack. It's the same with your website. Every new module, every new dependency is a liability. It's not an asset. It's another thing to be guarded, another thing to look after. Every bit of complexity is a bit more responsibility, something else you have to maintain. And I've got an interesting sort of theory as to why we end up here. And I think it happens in pitches, and I think it happens in boardrooms. Sales-driven development comes back to this idea that WordPress, ballroom, we can't use WordPress, but WordPress with Next.js in front of it. Dijkstra said, simplicity is a great virtue, but it requires hard work to achieve and education to appreciate. And to make matters worse, complexity sells better. And it does. You can sell more if it sounds complex. It's a bit smoke and mirrors. A really, 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 really dear client of mine, this next screenshot is not the client, but it's a case study about their website. A very dear client of mine. This case study came out in March 2023. And it says here, it's a world first for Mac architecture and composable commerce. Honestly, I've forgotten what Mac stands for. Something API, cloud native, and hamburgers, I'm not sure. But this world first, this is a £1 billion company, which is a very conveniently round number, I know. This client of mine, again, this is the case study about the client. This is a £1 billion company. If I'm doing a digital transformation project for a £1 billion company, I don't want a world first. No, thank you. I'm not taking that risk. I want something proven. I want something reliable. I want something with a good track record. This case study was written in March 2023. Guess who got an email to fix a slow website in May 2023? I did. We did it. The team did it, actually. I facilitated. The team did amazing work. This site is now buttery smooth, super fast. But they'd spent a lot of money. A big fancy London agency built them a site that was more or less unfit for purpose. It was basically so slow as to be unusable. An interesting artifact of this particular project was, again, this sales-driven development. So let's say the customer is in the UK, here in Hull, for example. The client's platform as a service was US-based. So in a cache miss scenario, you might go to US East, Virginia probably. But then the CMS is a Dutch firm. So if there's a cache miss there, and the sort of the compute in the US has to go to probably somewhere in Frankfurt maybe, or it has to go to data centers for, what would that be? EU West. But then it can't just go straight back to Hull, can it? It's got to go all the way back to the US, back to Virginia, build the HTML response, before sending it back over the pond to us here in Hull. What used to be a simple request-response lifecycle is now a transatlantic song and dance. In fact, I'm old enough to remember that we'd build websites, and your database and your application would live on the same box, probably in the same storeroom with a post-it that said, "Do not turn off." Now we've traded it for this. It's not better. It costs a lot more to run, it costs a lot more to purchase, it costs a lot more to fix. Another client, this is a Dutch client of mine, their website is huge. They're a really big firm in the Netherlands. So big firms, surely they must need big, complex solutions to their problems. It's e-com. They're selling clothing. It's not a big, we've solved it. That's not to sort of look down my nose at the work they're doing great work. But it's not revolutionary coding, right? The tech isn't, it's been done. Their site is fronted by Akamai. Very pro this. I mean, I'd rather it was Cloudflare. But yeah, Akamai, great idea. A CDN, I love that idea. But if you get a cache miss there, their compute is over at Netlify, which also has its own CDN. They've got 2 layers of CDN. It's this, 2 CDNs isn't faster than 1, right? It's not how CDNs work. Again, it's a different client, but they're also using Bloomreach, a CMS that's based also in the Netherlands. Their e-com is provided by Magento. It's now an Adobe company. And their personalization is done by a company called BlueConic. Personalization is done server-side. And this is one of those gray areas where people say server-ended is faster. Not if you're doing personalization, because the amount of cache keys you have to hold for different personalized content. What I'm trying to get at is, all 5 of these companies are involved in serving one HTML page. And any cache miss along that route, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. And one of the first things I did at this project is pull as much personalization onto the client as we can, so we don't have to hold 1 trillion different variations of an HTML page per identified user, and just tighten up the caching at every single layer, because this is expensive, and when it goes really wrong. Happily, though, we are starting to see a bit of a course correction. We are starting to bring things back a little bit. We are starting to, what is old is new again, and we're starting to kind of rediscover techniques we used in yesteryear. They're coming back to the fore. We are starting to correct course. My friend Alex Russell calls this front-end's lost a decade, or front-end's lost decade, and I think his timings are bang on. I remember in 2016, in fact, so Ryan's actually one of my dearest friends, and I remember talking to Ryan 10 years ago about, this React stuff doesn't seem right, does it? It can't be faster. But I'm not a JavaScript developer, so I didn't say anything, and I wish I'd given this talk 10 years ago. I'm not saying I could have saved the industry 10 years of lost time, but these are things that were starting to niggle away at my sort of psyche about 10 years ago. The timings are uncanny. So if we look at things like DHH from Basecamp, he said they're leaving the cloud. This is a big player. These are big names who are sort of, I don't know, turning their back on modern, newfangled things. Except, because they're tech bros, they've called it cloud repatriation. Get over yourself. It's self-hosting. Are you kidding me? This is the bit where this is the bit of the talk that genuinely becomes a rant, because this is offensive, and you should be offended too. Tech bros, JavaScript bros, stole front end for a decade, and they're giving it back to us under a new name like they saved us. Server-side rendered. Ooh, fancy. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Server-side rendered. It's a fucking web page. We've had them for decades. Static site generation, SSG. Oh, yeah, great. Do it ahead of time. That sounds really good. I had a flat file website when I was 17. This is not new tech. It's new branding. And it's this savior complex. We've been led down the garden path for the best part of 10 years, and we're being told by the same people who did it, hey, I've got an idea. I can make your site faster by statically generating it. You did not have that idea. Div ID equals app. We've tried this. It didn't work. Bundling runtimes doesn't work. We tried it. I'm willing to bet about half the room have got no idea what that means. This is the one that does offend me, and I do take this one personally. Multiple page app. Imagine inventing single page apps, realizing they were wrong, but not being brave enough to say, that was a misfire on our part, rebranding it multiple page app, and I feel sick every time I have to say that phrase, because it's just a website. I'm not, it offends me. Multiple page app, people say, oh, we've got an MPA. It's like, no, you've got a website. You don't have an SPA. There's no category that's not SPA. Anyway, this next section piggybacks, like I said, this is the philosophical counterpart to Ryan's talk. I want to briefly put a bit of optimism into the talk and look at some specs. And I can gloss over this section fairly quickly. Ryan went much deeper than I'm about to. Here are some web performance-facing specs that have me really excited, that mean we don't need to have hundreds of kilobytes of runtime. And in the interest of fairness, it's worth me restating, smooth navigation, soft navigation, smooth transitions, all that kind of stuff. This is innovation that was made by frameworks, and they did turn out to be a reasonably good idea, so they have been subsumed into the platform. Good ideas come out of frameworks. This is not bashing React or Vue or anything. But the platform can do a lot of this stuff now. So, really quickly, smooth page transitions. Not that I think anybody's ever asked for them. Has anybody ever done a user research session where the user said, well, the site logs me out every 30 seconds, and I can't find any of the products because your search is broken, but what would really fix this for me is a smooth page transition. I don't think a real customer, a real user, has ever actually asked for this. But it's like a straw man. It was developed by developers and told, hey, well, that's what people expect now. I'm not sure they do. View transitions solve this. 3 lines, or as Ryan said, 1 line after you've minified it. This just goes into your CSS, and you magically get smooth. Put these 3 lines into your main CSS bundle on a website, not an SPA, and you'll see you get smooth page transitions for 3 lines of CSS. Magical. Route prefetching. So this was actually a good idea. We made single page apps, but you're still going to fetch the data. Well, why don't we lazily prefetch the next routes? Not a bad idea. We can now do this and the rest with speculation rules, as Ryan looked at earlier. With a simple bit of declarative JSON, you can say, hey, look, when this page loads, read this script. If you support this script type, speculation rules, go and grab these pages for me. So this is me on my website. If you're reading an article, the browser will automatically prefetch and pre-render my previous and my next article for the pagination. Nice and fast, nice and smooth. And this is the one that excites me the most, and it's also the one that's the most difficult to implement, is if we genuinely value sending just the diff, framework world where you just have a JSON response that contains just the content needed for the next page, then we've got compression dictionaries where we can effectively send just the diff. And again, Ryan went into much more detail for us. Guys, I know it's his birthday, but this is now the Ryan show, isn't it? But anyway, so we've got an HTML page here, page 1, and a link to page 2, and then page 2 looks remarkably similar. We've got page 2, and a link back to page 1. The difference between those 2 pages is simply that. With compression dictionaries, we can send just that. Everything else is compressed against in a dictionary that exists externally. Scroll positioning. It's called the fucking back button. We've had this for about 20-odd years. The idea that your e-com store needs a custom-built back button to preserve scroll position when someone hits back in their browser is mind-boggling. These are problems we've created for ourselves. So, again, the best talk I ever saw on this kind of stuff, Ryan gave at an event that I run over in Amsterdam. There's a link to this talk on the next slide. But if you want to go a deep dive at looking at these technologies, this talk was really, really great. And just to paraphrase Ryan, he said at the time, users don't want a smooth page transitions. They just want a fucking website that works. And I think he's right, and I don't think that's too much to ask. Right, just wrapping up, I want to talk about a concept that I call forwards compatibility. As developers, we're paranoid about backwards compatibility. Will it still work? Will it work with this? There's an exciting concept that the web gives us, and that's what I call forwards compatibility. The web, as a platform, doesn't have a version number. Browsers have version numbers, and very foolishly, about 15 years ago, someone decided to call it HTML5. But the platform does not have a version number. If you don't have a version number, then every direction is north. You can go anywhere. You're not stapled to any particular thing, which leads rise to something I like to call dormancy. My clients talked about at the top of the talk, they were trapped in upgrade cycles that lasted for months. You don't have to upgrade the web. You can just add features, and even if they are not yet supported, one day they'll just turn on. They can lie dormant and just turn on while you're having breakfast. You don't have to wait. I'm, again, old enough to remember, I did this years ago. To get round corners on my images, I'd put these 3 lines of CSS on the site, and one day, maybe Safari starts supporting round corners, so this kicks in. I didn't have to chase this. I put it in the CSS. The browser does nothing until it understands it. And then one day, Mozilla does the same thing. And then everyone triangulates on the same spec, and we get this. This is the ebb and flow of the platform underneath you. This is the web designing itself to fit your needs. It is versionless. You can opt into bits as you see fit. It's not about being behind or ahead of the curve. It's remembering that the curve is moving. Move with it. Versionless is a virtue. Like I say, if you don't have a version, every direction is north. Go wherever you want. You're not tied to upgrade life cycles or losing time to upgrading entire stacks. And this is the thing I find really interesting. I mentioned at the top of the talk how I've seen a lot of the web stay the same. The web is a very solid foundation. It is slow moving, and that can be frustrating, and that's why we have people like Facebook inventing React and innovating. The web does move slowly, but that in itself is a responsibility to you. It's a safe bet. The web cannot change. If it changes, everything tumbles down. Use that to your advantage. And none of this is unique to the web. I'm not saying the web's the only thing that does this and that the web's going to save the world, but it's a core tenet of the web. So with that, I'd like to wrap up and say, long live the platform, long live the web, and most importantly, thank you very much for listening. Oh.